Given the partnership dissolution agreement you signed, and Mr. Sterling's family investment in the firm, the board has voted to retain him as lead architect on the Riverside development. Your design concepts will be credited as collaborative work. Collaborative work. My revolutionary sustainable design that had taken 18 months of research and development was being reduced to collaborative work. The building that was supposed to transform Portland's waterfront, the project that Architectural Digest had already committed to featuring, was now officially David's achievement. My attorney, a kind woman named Patricia Chen, who I'd hired too late in the process, touched my arm gently. "Sophie, we can fight this, but the partnership agreement you signed is unfortunately very clear about intellectual property developed during the partnership. I'd signed that agreement 3 years ago, right after David proposed, when I was so in love and so naive that I actually believed we were building something together. He'd convinced me that combining our practices was the smart move, that his family's real estate connections would give us access to projects I could never land on my own. What he'd really meant was that my designs would give him credibility he could never earn through his own mediocre work. Walking out of that office felt like walking through a graveyard of my own ambitions. My phone was already buzzing with messages from other clients, all of them awkwardly explaining that they'd be working with David going forward. In the architecture world, breakups are messy and everyone picks sides. David had the connections, the charm, and the Morrison family name behind him. I had my portfolio and my reputation, which apparently weren't enough. The worst part came when I returned to the apartment we'd shared in the Pearl District. David had already moved his things out, leaving only my furniture and a note on the kitchen counter. "Sophie, you're incredibly talented, but you were always too idealistic for this business. I need a partner who understands that architecture is about relationships and money, not just pretty drawings. I hope you find what you're looking for." The engagement ring sat next to the note, mocking me with its 3-carat reminder of how completely I'd misjudged everything. I had exactly one place I could afford to go on my rapidly dwindling savings: the small craftsman house in Northeast Portland that my father had left me when he died 2 years ago. I'd been renting it out to cover the mortgage, but the tenants had just moved out last month. It needed work, lots of work, but it was mine. David's name was nowhere on the deed, and for the first time in weeks, that felt like a small victory. The house looked worse than I remembered. Dad had bought it as a fixer-upper project we were going to work on together, but then the cancer diagnosis came and we'd never gotten around to it. Now the bungalow sat there with peeling paint and an overgrown yard, a physical manifestation of all the projects I'd left unfinished while chasing David's version of success. I grabbed my suitcase and the 3 boxes that contained everything I'd salvaged from my old life and walked up the creaking porch steps. The key still worked, thank God. Inside smelled like dust, and the particular sadness of a house that hadn't been loved in too long. Dad's old furniture remained covered in sheets, and I could still see his reading chair by the window where he used to review my college design projects, offering gentle criticism and unwavering belief in my abilities. That first night, I cried myself to sleep in my childhood sleeping bag on Dad's old couch, too exhausted to even make up the bed upstairs. But when morning came with light streaming through the arts and crafts windows Dad had always loved, something shifted in me. I had 2 choices: let David's betrayal define me, or figure out how to rebuild on my own terms. As I made instant coffee in Dad's ancient kitchen, I decided to fight. I just had no idea that Dad had already armed me for this battle years before his death. The next morning, I woke up with the beginning of a plan. First priority, make this house livable. Second priority, figure out how to restart my career without David's connections or resources. Third priority, prove to myself and everyone else that Sophie Hayes was more than just David Sterling's talented sidekick. I started with the basics. The furnace coughed to life after some persuasion and a YouTube tutorial about pilot lights. The plumbing worked, mostly, though the kitchen faucet had a personality I'd need to negotiate with daily. I spent 3 days cleaning, cataloging what needed immediate repair, and trying not to think about David presenting my waterfront design to the client as his own vision. On the 4th day, my old professor from Cornell called. "Sophie, I heard what happened. I'm sorry. David always was more ambitious than talented." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There's a small, sustainable housing project in Southeast Portland looking for an architect. It doesn't pay much, but it's good work. Community-focused, environmentally responsible. Might be a place to start rebuilding." The project was a non-profit organization called New Roots, developing affordable, eco-friendly housing for formerly homeless families. The budget was microscopic compared to what I was used to, and the timeline was aggressive. But the director, a fierce woman named Carmen Rodriguez, believed in the mission with an intensity that reminded me why I'd wanted to become an architect in the first place. "We can only pay you $45 an hour, Carmen said apologetically during our first meeting. "I know that's nowhere near your usual rate, but we could really use someone with your sustainable design expertise." The site showed me the lot in the Jade District, a narrow parcel that most architects would dismiss as too small and too challenging. But I saw potential. I saw the kind of creative problem-solving that David had never been interested in because it didn't come with prestige or profit margins. "I'll do it," I said. And I meant it. For the next month, I threw myself into the New Roots project, designing a 4-unit building that maximized the narrow lot while incorporating passive solar heating, rainwater collection, and community garden space. Working with a tight budget forced me to be more innovative than I'd been in years. Every design decision had to serve multiple purposes. Every material choice had to balance sustainability with cost-effectiveness. The work was satisfying in ways my high-end projects with David had never been. But financially, I was barely surviving. After rent, utilities, and my student loans, I had maybe $200 left each month. My car was making concerning noises I couldn't afford to investigate. And my professional network was awkwardly distant, clearly unsure whether maintaining contact with me would offend David and his powerful family. 2 months into my new reality, I received a notice from a storage facility in Beaverton. "Your rental unit 247, registered to Robert Hayes, is 3 months overdue. Please contact us to arrange payment or removal of contents." Dad's storage unit. I'd completely forgotten about it. He'd mentioned it once during his final weeks, something about keeping some work stuff there, but we'd been so focused on his treatment that I'd never followed up. Now I owed $340 in back fees and had 30 days to clear it out or they'd auction the contents. I drove out to the facility on a Saturday morning, dreading another bill I couldn't afford. Unit 247 was in the back corner, covered in dust and clearly untouched for years. When I finally got the rusty lock open and pulled up the door, I found myself staring at a space filled with filing cabinets, old drafting tables, and dozens of cardboard boxes labeled in Dad's careful handwriting. For the next 4 hours, I sorted through the contents, discovering a side of my father I'd never fully understood. Dad had been a civil engineer, practical and methodical, someone I'd always seen as supportive of my creative dreams but not particularly artistic himself. But these boxes told a different story. The first filing cabinet contained project files from Dad's early career, detailed plans for bridges and public buildings, all marked with a design sensibility I recognized. The second cabinet held something unexpected: architectural sketches, dozens of them, signed Robert Hayes and dated from the 1980s and early 1990s. My father had wanted to be an architect. I sat down hard on an old office chair, holding a beautiful rendering of a community center that had never been built. Dad had never told me this. He'd supported my architecture dreams, helped me with my applications to Cornell, celebrated every achievement, but he'd never mentioned that he'd wanted the same career path and apparently hadn't pursued it. The third filing cabinet was locked, with a small combination lock I almost missed. I tried Dad's birthday, nothing. Then my birthday, also nothing. Then, on impulse, I tried the date he'd bought this house for us to fix up together. 052018. The lock clicked open. Inside was a large envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting, and below it were legal documents I couldn't immediately identify, property records, and what looked like old business correspondence. But it was the envelope that made my hands shake as I opened it. "My dearest Sophie," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found what I've been saving for you all these years. I need you to understand something about our family that I never felt you were ready to hear while I was alive." I stopped reading and looked around the dusty storage unit, the afternoon light creating long shadows across Dad's carefully preserved archive. What had he been saving, and why had he never told me? The letter continued, and with each sentence, I felt like I was meeting my father for the first time. "Sophie, I wanted to be an architect more than anything when I was your age. I had the talent, the drive, the vision, but I made a mistake that cost me everything. I trusted the wrong partner, a man named Marcus Sterling, who took my designs, my clients, and my future." Yes, David's grandfather. My hand started shaking so hard I almost dropped the pages. David's grandfather had done to my father exactly what David had done to me. This wasn't coincidence. This was history repeating itself, and somehow Dad had seen it coming. "When you told me you were partnering with David Sterling, I tried to warn you gently. But you were so in love, so convinced that your partnership would be different. I understood, because I'd felt the same way about Marcus 40 years ago. So instead of fighting your choice, I prepared for the possibility that you might need what I'm about to show you. The letter went on for 3 more pages, explaining how Dad had rebuilt his life as a civil engineer, how he'd invested carefully and documented everything, and how he'd discovered something about the Sterling family that I could use if I ever needed it. But more importantly, he'd left me tools to rebuild my career on my own terms. I looked at the documents beneath the letter. Property deeds for 3 parcels of land in areas of Portland that were now prime development zones. Stock certificates for a small tech company Dad had invested in 20 years ago, a company that had just been acquired by Google for a valuation that made my head spin. Bank account information for a trust fund he'd set up in my name, accessible now that I was over 30. The numbers were staggering. The property alone was worth close to $3 million in today's market. The stock sale had netted another $1.8 million. The trust fund contained $400,000. My father, the modest civil engineer who'd lived in a small house and driven a 10-year-old truck, had quietly built a fortune and saved it all for me. But the most valuable item was a thick folder labeled Sterling Family Business Practices, 1985 to 2020. Inside were documented instances of the Sterling family using the same playbook across 3 generations, bringing in talented partners, having them sign disadvantageous agreements, stealing their work, and using family money and connections to push the original creators out. My situation with David wasn't personal. It was standard operating procedure. At the bottom of the folder was a flash drive with a sticky note in Dad's handwriting, video deposition, Marcus Sterling, 1987. He admitted everything before the settlement. They paid me $50,000 to destroy this. I took the money and kept the evidence. Use it if you need it, but only if you really need it. The best revenge is building something they can never touch. I sat in that storage unit until the sun set, holding the evidence of my father's foresight and the proof that I wasn't crazy or paranoid. The Sterling family had been doing this for decades, and Dad had given me both the resources and the ammunition to fight back. As I loaded the most important documents into my car, I realized something profound. Dad had lost his dream of being an architect, but he'd spent 40 years making sure I wouldn't lose mine. He'd seen through David's charm to the family pattern beneath it, and when I hadn't listened to his gentle warnings, he'd prepared a backup plan. That night, I sat in Dad's old reading chair, reviewing every document and making plans. I had resources now. Real resources. But more importantly, I had knowledge. Understanding that my failure wasn't personal weakness. It was a systematic exploitation that the Sterling family had perfected over generations. David had taken my firm and my designs, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the daughter of Robert Hayes, a man who'd learned to play the long game and taught me everything I needed to know, even from beyond the grave. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began the moment I walked out of that storage unit. I spent 3 days reviewing every document Dad had left me, understanding not just what I had, but what I could build with it. My first call was to a real estate attorney named James Park, who specialized in property development. I need to understand the development potential of these parcels, I said, sending him the property deeds. And I need to move quickly. The 3 properties Dad had purchased in the 1,990 seconds were now in the heart of Portland's hottest development zones. One was a corner lot in the Alberta Arts District, another was a small warehouse space near the Willamette River, and the third was a residential parcel in what was now the thriving Division Street corridor. Combined, they represented nearly 4 acres of prime real estate in locations where architects and developers were fighting for scraps. Miss Hayes, James said after his analysis, these properties are worth approximately $3.2 million, but their development potential is easily triple that if you have the right vision and team. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about building something the Sterling family never saw coming. Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled a team. Carmen from New Roots became my first partner, bringing her passion for sustainable, affordable housing and her connections in the community development world. James Park joined as legal counsel and development advisor. I brought in my former Cornell classmate Rachel Kim, a brilliant structural engineer who'd always hated David and was thrilled to work with me again. We called it Hayes Development Group, and our mission was simple: prove that sustainable, community-focused architecture could be both profitable and transformative. The Alberta Arts District property would become our flagship project, a mixed-use building with affordable artist studios, retail space, and community gathering areas. The design incorporated everything I'd learned from the New Roots project, scaled up and refined. But I kept my work quiet, deliberately avoiding any publicity or permits that might alert David to what I was building. The Sterling family thrived on controlling narratives and crushing competition before it could establish itself. I wasn't going to give them that opportunity. My certification as a general contractor came through after 8 weeks of intensive study. I needed to understand every aspect of development, not just design. Dad's letter had emphasized self-sufficiency, never again being dependent on partners who could take everything. The bank, once I'd transferred Dad's trust fund and established my financial credibility, was surprisingly eager to back my first development project. "Your father was a valued client for many years," the commercial lending manager told me, "and frankly, your sustainable design approach is exactly what Portland needs right now. The market is oversaturated with luxury condos. Nobody's building for the communities that actually need housing." 4 months after finding Dad's storage unit, I broke ground on the Alberta Arts District project. The design was bold, innovative, and completely different from anything David was doing with his high-end luxury developments. I wasn't competing with him directly. I was creating an entirely new category. The local architecture community started noticing. Portland Monthly ran a feature on Hayes Development Group's first project, praising the design's integration of sustainability and affordability. Regional planning commissions invited me to speak about inclusive development practices. My waiting list for the artist studios filled up before we'd even finished the foundation. But I kept my biggest asset secret. The flash drive with Marcus Sterling's deposition sat in a safety deposit box, insurance I hoped I'd never need to use. Dad's final advice echoed in my mind. The best revenge is building something they can never touch. 6 months into my comeback, I received an unexpected call. David's assistant, awkwardly explaining that Mr. Sterling wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. The irony was almost funny. I met him at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, neutral territory where his family name carried less weight. David arrived looking confident, successful, every bit the rising star architect he'd always wanted to be. My waterfront design, the one he'd stolen, had just won a regional AIA award. His name was on it. "Sophie," he began, smiling like we were old friends. "I've been following your new work. The Alberta project is interesting. Different from what we were doing together, but there's definitely potential. I thought maybe we could explore some opportunities for partnership." The audacity of it took my breath away. He'd stolen my firm, my designs, my biggest client, and now he wanted to partner again because my new work was gaining attention he couldn't replicate on his own. "Why would I want to partner with you, David?" I asked calmly, sipping my coffee. "You took everything from me 6 months ago. What exactly do you bring to this conversation besides a history of betrayal?" His smile faltered. "Sophie, that was business. We had different visions for the firm's direction, but I've always respected your talent. The Hayes development approach could complement our high-end portfolio. Think about the opportunities we could create together." I set down my coffee and opened my bag, removing a folder I'd prepared carefully. "Before we discuss opportunities, I want to show you something." Inside were copies of Dad's documentation. The pattern of Sterling family exploitation across 40 years. The video deposition from Marcus Sterling admitting to stealing Robert Hayes' architectural designs in 1987. Photographs of my original waterfront design sketches, dated and notarized, proving that the award-winning project was entirely my concept developed before David's involvement. I watched the color drain from his face as he flipped through the pages. Where did you get this?" "My father documented everything," I said quietly, "including what your grandfather did to him. It's the same playbook, David. The charming partnership, the contract that favors the Sterling family, the systematic theft of intellectual property, the use of family money and connections to push out the original creator. You didn't just betray me personally, you followed a family tradition." David's hand shook slightly as he closed the folder. "What do you want? Money? An apology? Credit on the waterfront project?" "I want you to understand something," I said, leaning forward. "I don't need your opportunities or your partnerships. I've built something you can never touch. Hayes Development doesn't need Sterling family connections because we're serving communities you've never cared about. My client list is growing. My projects are winning attention because they're actually innovative, not just expensive." I stood up, leaving the folder on the table. "Keep those copies. Consider them a reminder that I have all the evidence I need to destroy your reputation and your family's business practices if I ever choose to use it. But I'm not going to. Not because I've forgiven you, but because exposing you would mean I'm still defining myself by your actions." As I walked away, David called after me. "Sophie, wait, please. We can work this out." I stopped at the door and looked back at him. "David, you taught me something valuable. You showed me that talent without integrity is just temporary success. Build whatever empire you want with your family's money and stolen designs. I'll be over here building something that actually matters to people who need it." The victory felt better than I'd imagined, not because I'd hurt him, but because I genuinely didn't need anything from him anymore. My business continued to grow beyond anything I'd planned. The Alberta Arts District project completed on schedule and under budget, immediately becoming a case study in sustainable community development. The artist studios had a waiting list of over 200 applicants. The ground floor retail spaces housed locally owned businesses that couldn't afford typical Pearl District rents. The community gathering space hosted everything from neighborhood meetings to youth art classes. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. The Portland Development Commission invited me to pitch a major affordable housing project on publicly owned land near the waterfront. 20 acres of prime real estate that the city wanted to develop as mixed-income housing with sustainability requirements that had scared off traditional developers. The selection committee included regional planners, community advocates, and architectural review board members. David had submitted a proposal too, backed by his family's development company and featuring the kind of luxury-focused design he'd built his reputation on. We were competing directly for the first time, and everyone in Portland's architecture community knew it. My presentation focused on community integration, environmental sustainability, and the financial model that made affordable housing actually feasible without massive public subsidies. I'd spent 3 months developing the design with input from future residents, social service providers, and environmental consultants. It was comprehensive, detailed, and represented everything I'd learned from my father's careful planning and my own hard-won experience. "Miss Hayes," the committee chair said after my presentation, "this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we'd hope to see. How confident are you in these cost projections? They're significantly lower than other proposals we've received." "I'm very confident," I replied. "I've built relationships with sustainable material suppliers, modular construction companies, and workforce development programs. This isn't theoretical. Every number in that proposal comes from real partnerships and proven methods." The committee deliberated for 2 weeks. When the call came, I was in the middle of reviewing plans for my second development project on Dad's Division Street property. "Miss Hayes, this is Catherine Morrison from the Portland Development Commission. I'm pleased to inform you that the committee has unanimously selected Hayes Development Group for the Waterfront Commons project. Your proposal demonstrated the vision and community-focused approach we're looking for." I sat down hard in Dad's old chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd just won. The Waterfront Commons project was worth $45 million and would establish me as a major player in Portland's development landscape. More importantly, it proved that sustainable, community-focused architecture wasn't just idealistic theory. It was commercially viable and increasingly preferred over the luxury developments that had dominated the market. David sent a terse email that evening. "Congratulations on the Waterfront Commons project. You've clearly found your niche." It was meant to be dismissive, reducing my major victory to a niche market. But I understood what he couldn't. Niche markets built with integrity and community support become movements. Luxury developments built on stolen ideas just become dated buildings. 1 year after finding Dad's storage unit, I stood at the groundbreaking ceremony for Waterfront Commons, surrounded by community leaders, future residents, and a design team I'd assembled based on talent and shared values. The local news covered the event, highlighting the innovative sustainability features and the affordable housing model that other cities were already studying. But the moment I treasured most came that evening when I visited Dad's grave for the first time since the funeral. I'd been too angry at the world back then, too consumed by David's betrayal and my own sense of failure. Now I sat by the headstone and told him everything. "Dad, I found your storage unit. I found the letters, the properties, the evidence. I found out what Marcus Sterling did to you, and how you spent 40 years preparing for the possibility that his grandson might do the same to me. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your warnings. I'm sorry I had to lose everything before I understood what you were trying to tell me. But I want you to know something. I didn't use the evidence to destroy David. I used the resources you left me to build something better. Hayes Development Group is everything you taught me architecture should be: functional, beautiful, and serving the people who actually need it. The Waterfront Commons project will house 300 families, include community gardens, renewable energy, and workforce training spaces. It's the kind of project you would have loved." I pulled out the letter Dad had written, the one I'd read dozens of times in the past year. "The best revenge is building something they can never touch." "You were right, Dad. You were right about everything." 2 years after my rebirth as a developer, Hayes Development Group had completed 4 major projects and had 6 more in development. My team had grown to 15 people, all of them passionate about sustainable design and community-focused development. We'd become the go-to firm for municipalities and nonprofits looking for alternatives to traditional luxury development. But the most satisfying recognition came from an unexpected source. Portland State University's urban planning program invited me to teach a graduate seminar on sustainable community development. Professor Hayes, the department chair, said, smiling at my surprise, "Your work represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we want our students to learn." Teaching forced me to articulate what I'd learned through failure and rebuilding. The class became a space where I could share not just technical knowledge, but the deeper lessons about integrity, community engagement, and the long-term thinking that Dad had exemplified. During one lecture, a student asked about my early career and how I'd established myself so quickly in such a competitive field. It's a question that made me pause, considering how much to share. "I didn't establish myself quickly," I said finally. "I spent 5 years building someone else's career before I understood that real success means building something that reflects your values. I lost my firm, my designs, and my professional reputation before I discovered what my father had been trying to teach me all along." I shared the story carefully, without naming David or the Sterling family, but making clear the pattern of exploitation and the choice I'd faced between revenge and reconstruction. My father left me resources when he died, but more importantly, he left me evidence that my failure wasn't personal weakness. It was a systematic exploitation I'd been naive enough to trust. He also left me advice that changed everything. He said the best revenge is building something they can never touch. The students were silent, absorbing the weight of that lesson. One young woman raised her hand. "Professor Hayes, did you ever regret not exposing the person who betrayed you? Don't you think others should know what he did?" "Every day at first," I admitted. "I had evidence that could have destroyed his reputation and probably his career. But I realized something important. Exposing him would have made my success about him, about proving he was wrong and I was right. Building Hayes Development Group made my success about me, about the communities we serve, about proving that architecture can be both profitable and purposeful." That realization had come slowly, but it had changed everything. I wasn't Sophie Hayes, the architect who was betrayed by David Sterling. I was Sophie Hayes, founder of a development company that was changing how cities approached affordable housing and sustainable design. The final vindication came 3 years after that first groundbreaking. The American Institute of Architects awarded Hayes Development Group their highest honor for community-focused design excellence. The ceremony was in Chicago, a national stage that represented everything I'd worked toward. David was there too. His firm had been nominated in a different category for the waterfront project, my stolen design that he'd claimed as his own. He didn't win. His name was called as an honorable mention, while Hayes Development received the top award for Waterfront Commons and our body of work over 3 years. In the reception afterward, he approached me with a champagne glass and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sophie, congratulations. You've built something impressive, really." "Thank you," I said simply, not offering anything more. He stood there awkwardly, clearly wanting something but unsure how to ask for it. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said in that coffee shop, about building something that matters. I wonder if you'd ever consider consulting on some of our projects. Bring your community-focused approach to our work." The irony was breathtaking. After stealing my firm and my designs, he now wanted to buy my expertise and use my reputation to make his soulless developments seem socially responsible. "David," I said gently, "you still don't understand. This isn't a methodology you can purchase or a trend you can adopt. It's a fundamental difference in how we view architecture and who we believe it should serve. You build for profit and prestige. I build for people and purpose. Those approaches don't collaborate well." I walked away before he could respond, joining Carmen and Rachel and the rest of my team. These were the people who'd believed in the vision when I had nothing but Dad's inheritance and a determination to prove that sustainable development could work. Their celebration of our shared success meant more than any hollow conversation with David ever could. That night, I called my mother, who'd watched my journey from devastation to triumph with patient support. "Mom," I said, "I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach me all those years. It wasn't just about the money or the properties he left me. It was about knowing your worth and building from that foundation." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your father always knew you'd do something remarkable, Sophie. He just wanted to make sure you had the tools when you were ready to use them. I think he'd be proud of who you've become, especially because you chose to build rather than destroy." As I hung up the phone and looked out at Chicago's skyline from my hotel window, I felt a deep gratitude that had nothing to do with awards or recognition. I'd lost everything, my firm, my fiancé, my professional identity, and in losing it all, I'd discovered what really mattered. Real security didn't come from partnerships or connections or even inherited wealth. It came from knowing I could create value, solve problems, and build relationships based on integrity rather than extraction. David had taken my first firm, but he'd accidentally freed me to build something far more meaningful. The best revenge truly was becoming the person I was meant to be. And as I prepared my acceptance speech for the next day, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. Not about betrayal or vindication, but about second chances and the wisdom of fathers who see further than we can imagine. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming betrayal and discovering your own strength. Remember, losing what you think you want sometimes leads you to build what you actually need. And sometimes the greatest gift isn't what people leave you, but what they teach you about who you really are.